words hit the room like a thunderclap no one saw coming. A billionaire in a crisp ivory suit, eyes hollow with urgency, stood before a silent crowd and said she needed a husband by tomorrow morning, or everything she had built would collapse. There was no laughter, no disbelief, only a strange tension that wrapped itself around every person in that sunlit hall. And then, from the back, a tired voice of a man holding his young daughter's hand broke the silence with a question so simple, so unexpected it changed everything. He asked if that meant they would have to live together. Before we step into this story, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel Home with Dad if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the quiet magic of unexpected love. The sunlight poured through the tall glass windows of the charity hall, painting everything in a warm golden hue that contrasted sharply with the tension in the air. Aurelia Vance had always been in control. She was known across cities and industries as the woman who could turn dust into diamonds, who could build empires where others saw nothing but risk. But today, even with the soft hum of polite society around her, she looked like someone standing at the edge of a cliff. Her announcement was not a joke. It wasn't a publicity stunt. It was desperation hidden beneath elegance. Aurelia had inherited not just wealth but expectations, an empire her late father had built from the ground up. But that empire came with a clause buried deep in legal ink. If she was not married by her 35th birthday, which was less than 24 hours away, control of the company would pass to a distant relative who had neither the vision nor the compassion to run it. It would destroy everything she had worked to protect, thousands of employees' families' futures. And Aurelia, who had spent years avoiding love, now needed it in its most official contractual form. The room had frozen after her announcement. Some people looked uncomfortable, others amused, a few curious. But no one stepped forward, except him. His name was Idris Hale. He didn't belong in that room, not really. His shirt was clean but worn, his shoes slightly scuffed, and there was a quiet exhaustion in his eyes that came from years of carrying more than one life on his shoulders. His daughter Noor clung to his hand, her small fingers wrapped tightly around his. He had come to the event because someone told him there would be free meals and activities for children. He didn't know he was walking into a moment that would change the course of his life. When he asked his question, the room shifted. It wasn't mocking or greedy. It was honest. Aurelia turned toward him slowly, her gaze scanning him in a way she rarely did with anyone. She saw not just his appearance, but the way he held his daughter protectively, the way his posture leaned slightly forward, as if always ready to shield her from harm. "Yes," she answered after a pause. Her voice, softer now. "It would mean we live together." The murmurs began immediately, whispers bouncing from one corner of the room to another. A billionaire marrying a stranger? A single father stepping into a world he didn't belong to? It sounded absurd. But Idris didn't laugh. He didn't step back either. He looked down at Noor, who was staring up at him with wide, curious eyes. She didn't understand contracts or empires. She understood hunger, warmth, and whether her father was safe. Idris had spent the last 3 years trying to survive after losing his wife in a sudden illness. The grief had been sharp at first, like glass cutting through every moment. But over time, it had dulled into something heavier, a constant ache that lived in his chest. He had taken on multiple jobs, sacrificed sleep, meals, and comfort, all so Noor could have a life that resembled normalcy. But lately, even that had begun to slip. The rent was overdue. The landlord had started making threats. Noor's school had sent notices about unpaid fees. Idris had reached a point where every option felt like a dead end, and now, standing in that sunlit hall, he was being offered something he never imagined. Security. Not love, not romance, but a chance. Aurelia watched him carefully. She wasn't looking for affection. She wasn't expecting a fairy tale. She needed someone trustworthy, someone who wouldn't exploit her desperation. And something about this man, this tired, quiet man, felt real. "Why would you do it?" someone from the crowd asked, their voice cutting through the whispers. Idris hesitated, his gaze still on his daughter. "Because," he said slowly, Sometimes survival doesn't look the way you expect it to. The simplicity of his answer silenced the room again. That afternoon, contracts were drawn. Lawyers were called. The world that Aurelia lived in moved quickly, efficiently, without emotion. By sunset, arrangements were in place, and by the next morning, under the bright light of a quiet courthouse, Aurelia Vance and Idris Hale were married. It wasn't romantic. There were no flowers, no music, no celebration. Just signatures, witnesses, and a shared understanding that this was a transaction. But Noor had smiled when Aurelia knelt down to her level and gently asked if she liked the big house they would be living in. That smile was the first crack in Aurelia's carefully built walls. The mansion was nothing like the life Idris and Noor had known. It was vast, echoing, filled with polished surfaces and quiet, corners that seemed untouched by warmth. Noor's footsteps sounded too loud on the marble floors, and Idris felt like he didn't belong in every room he entered. Aurelia noticed. She had spent years in that house without ever truly living in. It was a symbol of success, not a home. But now, with a child's laughter occasionally breaking the silence and a man quietly fixing things that didn't need fixing just to feel useful, something began to shift. The first real change came on an ordinary afternoon. Noor had been exploring the garden when she tripped and scraped her knee. It wasn't serious, but her cry echoed through the house. Idris rushed to her immediately, scooping her up, murmuring soft reassurances. Aurelia stood at a distance, watching. She didn't know what to do, not because she didn't care, but because she had never been in a position where care required action. Her life had been structured, controlled, predictable. Pain was something she managed in boardrooms, not something she held in her arms. But Noor reached out to her, tiny fingers extended. That moment changed everything. Aurelia hesitated only for a second before stepping forward, kneeling beside them. She gently cleaned the wound, her movements careful, almost uncertain. Noor watched her with complete trust, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And for the first time in years, Aurelia felt something she couldn't name. It wasn't obligation. It wasn't strategy. It was something deeper. Days turned into weeks, and the arrangement began to blur into something more complex. Idris remained respectful, never overstepping boundaries, always aware that this was not his world. But his presence brought a quiet steadiness that Aurelia had never known she needed. He didn't treat her like a billionaire. He treated her like a person. And that, more than anything, unsettled her. There were challenges, of course. The media caught wind of the sudden marriage, and headlines exploded with speculation. Some called it a scandal, others a calculated move. Few believed it was anything real. Inside the house, the pressure grew. Aurelia's board of directors questioned her decision. They worried about optics, about control, about the influence this unknown man might have. They didn't see Idris the way she was beginning to. They saw risk. And for the first time, Aurelia found herself defending something that wasn't part of a business plan. Idris, meanwhile, struggled with his own doubts. He knew this wasn't his place. He knew the world he had stepped into could easily push him out. But every time Noor laughed, every time she ran through the halls without fear, he reminded himself why he had said yes. It wasn't for him, it was for her. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, it became something more. A shared meal turned into conversation. Conversation turned into understanding, and understanding began to soften the edges of two very different lives. The turning point came on a bright afternoon when everything seemed calm. Aurelia received a call that changed everything. The relative, who had almost taken her company, had filed a legal challenge, questioning the legitimacy of her marriage. If proven to be a sham, it could still cost her everything. The fragile balance they had built was suddenly at risk. Aurelia felt the old panic rise again, sharper this time, not just because of the company, but because of what she stood to lose. Now, not the wealth, not the power, but them. Idris saw the fear in her eyes before she said a word, and for the first time since this began, he didn't stay silent. He stepped closer, his voice steady, and told her they would face it together. Because somewhere along the way, this had stopped being just an arrangement. It had become a life. As the legal battle loomed, the truth of their Relationship would be tested in ways neither of them expected, and yet, in the middle of uncertainty, something beautiful had already begun to grow. A connection built not on necessity, but on choice. A bond that neither of them had planned, but both had come to need. If this story is touching your heart, take a moment to like, comment, and share your thoughts. It helps these stories reach more people who believe in hope and second chances. And before we reach the end, here's a special request. Comment the word home if you believe a real family isn't defined by blood, but by love, care, and the courage to stay. The courtroom day arrived with a quiet intensity. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, much low,